Welcome to our webinar on pastoral practice and evangelization during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have with us Father David Caron. He is a Dominican friar and is the vicar for evangelization in the Archdiocese of New Orleans. So welcome, Father David.
Thank you, Father Frank, for your kind invitation.
So, Father, let's talk a little bit. You put together a number of resources that have been helpful, hopefully, for the pastoral ministers. They're really well thought out, different resources that can help those who are assisting our brothers and sisters in the faith, and also just in general. Over this time, which is certainly affecting everyone. This is not just a few people, not just a particular regional location, but are assisting people really not just in your context there in New Orleans. We've tried to put them on our resources, these kind of things, and that's one of the reasons why we invited you, because you put together a number of different pieces, one around the spiritual life and spirituality at this time, but also around pastoral care and evangelization. So as an official of a large archdiocese, what are some of the ways that you've responded to the needs of parishes during this time of crisis?
Well, I really see myself as being a resource for the pastors and the lay ecclesial ministers in our 109 parishes. And so the first thing that I did was I really felt it was important to call all of our pastors. I've reached about 70 out of the 109 so far, and I'm going to continue to reach out to those that either didn't answer or I left voicemails for. But for me, it was I felt we needed to listen to what people were experiencing, sort of boots on the ground in their own unique context. And some of the priests have been able to do lots of things with technology and digitally, helping to resource their people. But then there's a group of pastors that either don't have that capacity with technology, or because of age and life experience have never done this. And so they've actually gotten sort of frightened by it. And what they do is they direct people to the archdiocesan resources or to others that are being posted, which is great. And of course, they're celebrating masses. But as I called each of them, I asked two questions. One, how are you? That's the bottom line. And then second, like, how are you trying to reach out to your people? And really important questions. And with the first ones, a lot said, I'm doing okay. It feels strange. We're in a strange time. But, I'm trying to creatively work with others and collaborate with others to reach our people. Others, though, said, I'm lonely. I realize my life has been just about the sacraments for people, and now, in a sense, that's gone. And I really don't know what to do. So others are really missing that contact with people. So out of all of that is where the resources I put together came from. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. And they're certainly very helpful. Why don't we start with the spiritual ones then? Could you talk about your 4 Ps of spiritually thriving during the COVID-19 pandemic? And then you also say there's a +1, that there's an additional P as well. But could you take us through those step by step? Because you have some really wonderful things that are contained in each one of these.
Absolutely. So when I was first invited to participate in a Catholic community radio interview regarding spirituality and the pandemic, and so it was an early morning interview, and off the top of my head, I just basically came up with these 4 Ps of spiritually thriving, because I think we just don't want to skate by, we want to thrive, right, in all this. And so I came up with the first one: everyone has to have a plan. We start with the plan. So every person needs a personal plan, every family needs a plan. And now that we're into the 3rd and in some cases the 4th week, depending on where you are with this, maybe it's time to, if you don't have a plan, to enact one. But if you do have a plan, maybe it's time to change it up a little bit. So I said, have a plan, and the plan is no one should stay in their pajamas all day. No one should be watching the news 24/7. How are we trying to navigate the day? And I think about all the young parents that have their children home from school, and then they're also expected to work. Well, part of the plan is, how do we navigate using the technology for work and for school? In some cases, they're trying to do all of that maybe with 2 laptops. Well, how do you do that? So you have to create a plan. How do you plan for food shopping? How do you plan for meals? And so there's a lot of planning. The second P, which I really think is the most important one, is prayer. We've got to ask God to bless the plan, and also to help us to change the plan if we need to change it if it isn't working. So prayer is, for me, and for you too, Father Frank, I know, the most important part of this whole process. And there's lots of ways of praying. There's praying as a family. There's praying online, accessing the liturgy from your home parish if there's live streamed, or from the cathedral, or from other places. There's so many other ways of praying with the scriptures. So many other ways of praying, and a lot of dioceses and churches put out those resources. The third P for me was people. Watching the news and listening to some groups blaming other groups. And I experienced it for myself. I try really hard to go out for a walk every day to get some fresh air. I go very early in the morning, and I said hello to a lady, and she turned her head away from me as if she didn't want to breathe the same air. And we were pretty far apart. We were keeping the social distancing. Good lady, I'm sure, but probably fearful and fear-filled. And I said, you know what? We've got to say hello to people. We've got to engage people. And we need to do that personally from a distance, but we also need to do it with our families. We've got to keep connected with people. Maybe we need to call the widow or widower down the street, or those people that maybe really don't have the connections that we do. So we can do that through FaceTime. We can do it through social media. We can do it, Facebook. Lots of ways of connecting with people. The fourth P is we need to play. This is serious. This COVID-19, the statistic is close to 400,000 people in the United States have this. 12,000 plus, almost 13,000 have died. It's serious. But we also need to go outside, get some fresh air, perhaps play in the backyard if you've got kids, do some gardening, sit with a really good spiritual book. What are you reading right now? It's really important. We're in Holy Week. You should be reading something really good that connects you to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So we need some playtime, so that we get some fresh air. We can clear our heads, clear our hearts. Something we're not hearing about, but I hear a little bit about here in New Orleans, is domestic violence has gone up. And that is probably no surprise to people, because now we're kind of trapped together, where before we weren't so much. So how do we get that space so that we can clear our minds and our hearts, and in that be better able to deal with each other, and with the Lord? And we need to have joy in there, huh? And joy is one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, huh? So how do we do that? We got to create space. So those are the 4 P's I came up with. The 5th P was really not an action, it's an attitude. We have to have patience, huh? This is a trying time for everyone. I'm in contact with parents, I'm in contact with the Catholic Schools Office, and it's a learning curve to teach online, if you've never taught before. I speak to moms and dads who make part of the plan is, if either one of them gets a phone call from work, the other one then has to take charge of the kids for that half hour or whatever. It's really about having a plan, asking God to bless the plan, but then realize we have to have patience with each other, with the system, and with others. Father Frank, we also need to include here all those heroes and heroines that are in the front lines, our medical people, our first responders, all those people we need to be thanking God for. I think about the people who drive the trucks to bring the food, the bread, and the other things that we put on the shelves of our supermarkets. Without them, we wouldn't have anything, Yes. We also need to bring to prayer to those that are sick, and those that are dying and dying alone. I mean, this is a big heartache for a lot of our pastoral ministers, our pastoral agents, the priests and others that accompany those in nursing homes and hospitals through a variety of times, but now can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
For our families that can't be with their loved ones. I think one of the most difficult things on the other side of this, whenever this is going to happen, I think we're going to have to attend to a lot of grieving and a lot of guilt. More so maybe than we've ever seen before in the church, but I think we're up to it. Especially, we're talking about life, death, and resurrection in this week of Holy Week. I think we're up for it. We just feel terrible that people have to go through this, and we wrap our hearts and our prayer around those that are suffering. So the 4 P's, Father Frank, and the +1 is patience, that I came up with, and several people asked if I could write that up, and I did, and I actually sent that to you as a resource. So I hope it's helpful for people.
And we're going to be connected to the video. We'll have a link. We've already put them on our resource page, our COVID-19 resource page at CatholicApostolateCenter.org. And I think it really brings new meaning to St. Paul's patient endurance. Because that's what this is. There's also an endurance that goes along with this. That we're not. This is not a short-term type of thing. And of course, New Orleans has certainly seen its share of disasters and situations that have required patient endurance. And I just think about Hurricane, Katrina, for example, and what occurred in the pastoral care and all that occurred at that time, and the aftermath. And I think we need to see these things in a somewhat similar way, but it's difficult, I think, because it's invisible sometimes for people to take on the seriousness of this. They're trusting the medical personnel and so forth, but now they're seeing the statistics that you named at present, and they're just growing and growing every day. So many of the pastoral ministers, especially in the parishes, are finding this time really very pastorally challenging, especially with churches closed or only open with socially distanced prayer, depending on what the diocesan bishop has said. Certain sacraments that are not available at all, particularly the public masses, although they're being said. So, what are some things that really everyone, and you have a whole, again, great resource about some of the things that everyone can do at this time, not just simply pastoral ministers, but really everyone?
Well, I think you're right. I think, one of the great things even about what you all do, at the Catholic Apostolate and what others are trying to do out there is we have to realize that we have to have faith over fear. Mm-hmm. And then in that, we have to keep evangelizing. We need to be bringing the good news to other people. So one of the statistics, I'm on a lot of webinars to help get resources to pass those off to the churches and to schools and other organizations. And I heard a statistic yesterday, and I don't know where it came from. I hope it's true. It sounds like it is, that about 5% more people are attending Mass now than ever before. So I was talking to a pastor in this Archdiocese. He said that 2 Sundays ago, they had 1,200 people watching the Mass live stream. And he said, I have 3 Masses on a Sunday. I don't get 1,200 people sitting in the pew. So one of the things, people are coming either back to us or coming for the first time. And that's in a variety of different ways. And live streaming is just one of those ways. And I really think, Father Frank, I think this is an opportunity for us in the church to sort of redefine who we are, while always staying true to our roots. I think it's a chance for us to be both bold and equally important, faithful. We have to be faithful to what the church has taught and done, and we do. But we can be creative. I think, as you were just mentioning, both in the United States, but also here locally in New Orleans, we had benchmarkers in which we measure time. So when you live in New Orleans, people always talked about the storm. So they would mention in conversations from the storm till now, and then of course there's 9/11, and then before that there were other things like the death of John F. Kennedy. But now I think we're going to have a new benchmark. Corona will be a benchmark. And so there's lots of ways of reaching out to people. There's lots of important things that we need to be discussing. Of course, we've got to make sure that in our churches that that our staffs have access to our pastors. They may not be working from the office, or maybe they're staggered working in the office because of social distancing. But we have to make sure that people still have access to leadership. And so that's within the office context, but also people calling in with their need. So again, one of the things that as I spoke to pastors, who some said that they would forward the telephone to their secretary's house or their secretary's cell phone, I said, please make sure you say the parish name on the voicemail, because sometimes you get, hi, this is S.A.C. And it's like, in the right place. We have to do practical things to make sure that people feel connected properly, So we have to make sure that our churches are places where people can get the right information about the virus. I really think, and I've heard others say this too, that this is really a pro-life issue. Make sure that our people, our loved ones, are cared about both spiritually, but also connected to their health. We have to make sure that we're communicating with people, and that's a variety of ways. And parishes are doing it very creatively with their web pages and emails that go out, and maybe a pastor has a little reflection, or some parishes actually pass that among the staff, so it's not an imposition for just one person. It's an opportunity for many staff members to kind of share maybe a reflection on the scripture or on the season. But we have to make sure we're part of the communication of what's important and what's pertinent to people's lives. So I call that digital pastoral care. And so that's happening a lot in a lot of different ways. And our bishops are wonderful with the USCCB website as well. So there's lots of places where people can get resources. Digital small group opportunities are important too. So, I think we're at a point now where pastoral leadership, pastoral councils and finance councils are going to need to connect. And maybe that's through Zoom or some other platform, where they begin to say, what are we going to do after this? And I think bishops hopefully are doing that with some of their colleagues in their chancery offices, their pastoral offices, because we're at the point now where we've got to start to look at what the other side is going to look like. So, but that also means maybe it's a Bible study. Maybe it's a men's group or a women's group. Youth groups are meeting online together. Choirs are actually practicing together online through these. So I think that there's lots of ways where the ministry can continue to move us forward for now. Because a lot of parishes have music at Mass that's live streamed, but also as we get ready to celebrate the Triduum and beyond that. So again, we've got to be forward looking. Does that make sense? I hope it does.
It does. It makes a lot of sense, and technology is playing a role in some of this. But you really emphasize, and something we're certainly emphasizing, and you mentioned it a little earlier. But when you were making your own phone calls to pastors, but the use of an older technology, but one that seems to be coming back to the fore again in this moment, and that's the telephone. And utilizing that for pastoral care. Could you talk a little bit about some of your thoughts related to that?
Absolutely. So I think all the digital and the social media, all that is so important. It's really it's changing how we work, and it's changing really how we minister, and that will have an effect in the future as well. But I think I jokingly call it an old school technology. Basically, the phone is huge. I keep saying to pastors, You know, if you, with your parochial vicar, if you have one, or your deacons and your pastoral council member, if you just, each one of you, call 5 family members or 5 families every day and ask the same 2 questions. How are you doing? And is there anything we can be praying for you for?
Mm-hmm.
So I have people who have experienced that and have called me and said, I never thought I was important enough for my pastor to call.
Mm-hmm.
This is a game changer. You know, it's one thing to post things, and that's really important, but this is not a generic email. This is a personal contact. And I really believe that on the other side of this, people are going to remember this.
Yes.
They're going to remember this. And it's really kind of heart to heart. It gives the clergy an opportunity to hear the narrative. You know, in theological language, Father Frank, you and I both know we call this narrative theology.
Mm-hmm.
God in the story. It's very incarnational. And where's God in people's story? And sometimes that's in some really interesting and funny stories. Sometimes it's with people who are grieving, are really sad. Some is just with people that are numb and don't know what to do. And in that, God is present always, and we can be a voice. Any member of the team can be a voice to help people navigate that. So I'm a real big proponent of phone pastoral care. And actually, to tell you the truth, I think on the other side of this, people will remember it, and I think people might even kind of look at us to say that we were successful if we did this.
I think so. I think so very much. And very early on, we have been, as a center, been advocating that. We're seeing some really creative things from different dioceses. Your 2 questions, I think, are fantastic. Some have made it very extensive. They have whole scripts and things like that because they're trying to mobilize beyond the folks who are on the leadership in a given parish.
Right.
Probably doing this as an apostolate, but it's an outreach that I think sometimes we, as in recent years, I think sometimes we've just not necessarily been engaged in, as we've had maybe fewer clergy, we've had just so many, because oftentimes we were so programmatic. You know, here we'll put this program out there, but as we know, you know, that can be a maintenance mentality rather than a mission one. And that single telephone call could really be a change, quite the game changer in terms of outreach and missionary activity that is maybe not the way we would normally think of it. I'm thinking also of the people for whom lots of life events have been postponed or are not occurring. Or you mentioned one that's really tragic: the situations of people who die, and how grief is going to be postponed, whether they die alone as a result of COVID-19, or if they are in the regular course of life and someone dies, the limitation of the ability to come together and to grieve together because of a limitation of numbers. And then in some dioceses where they're not even having funerals. The priest is going to the cemetery. He's socially distant. He can't get close to even to the family. Gives a blessing and goes on his way. And that's really difficult. I heard one of my own community members talk about that, and that's really challenging not only for the pastoral people, but for the parishioners themselves.
Father Frank, you're describing the reality everywhere, and it's so true. And I think some of it is the present grief, and then there's anticipated grief too.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I'm dealing with in hopefully a pastoral way, and I'm sure many of your listeners are, depending on if they do this ministry, is marriage ministry. You know, there are lots of brides and grooms whose weddings are coming up in the next couple of months, and they're on the fence. Should we have this? Should we postpone it? What will it do? We've paid money, you know, and so the economic factor is involved in a lot of this, and we'll talk a little bit about how it's connected even to church. But I mean, so there's an anticipated grief that's there as well. You know, what are we going to do? And do we still have it? And then no one comes. I don't know if you saw, I saw on the news the other night that there was a bride who got married, and there was only four people in the church, the priest, the two witnesses, the bride and groom, and she was carrying an iPad, and her mother and father were on the iPad, so they walked her down the aisle virtually. So imagine having to make those decisions.
Yes.
Went into those, and then you think about seniors in high school and in college that aren't able to finish the year and aren't having commencements, and young people that aren't having prom. I mean, you're right. This has affected a lot of life moments that we're going to have to spend special attention to help pastorally care for people. So I think again, it's so important that we do the listening right now, and we hear the stories, and maybe even in parishes we archive some of the stories so that we can refer back to them, and they could even be case studies for the future. I really, just for priests alone, and I know this conversation isn't just about priests, but I think our identity as priests is going to be changed by this too. I would say that too, that really seminary formators and faculties need to be looking at this as well, because for those priests that were only sacramentally focused, and I'm not putting down sacraments, I'm a firm believer in them, but if that was your only ministry, then some of those men are depressed, they're lonely, they don't know what to do. But if you did have that added aspect of building community, and of course sacraments are always relational, then maybe you're able to navigate it a little differently.
I'm glad that you raised that, Father Dave. It's certainly something that we've talked about in the center, and I've talked about with a number of diocesan officials in different parts of the country, as well as priests and seminarians that we're in contact with and are collaborators with us. One of the things that you mention in the resources you put together is about the leader being a non-anxious presence. And could you talk a little bit about that, Father Dave? Because I think it's so critically important at this time, even when maybe that leader is having his own anxiety and challenge, or her, if they're an organizational leader, her as well. But I'm thinking at the moment about parishes where it would be a priest, but also you have organizational leaders that are called to not be manifest extensive anxiety. Not that one suppresses it, but what about that non-anxious presence? How would you say, Father Dave, that would be done in a time like this that's so challenging?
Right. Well, first of all, we don't really kind of exist alone, right? So each of us, no matter what our role is, whether we're a lay ecclesial minister or a deacon, a priest, or just someone in the pew, we all have extended family members that probably live in other parts of the world or the country, some because of age and circumstance. This virus, they may be the age group that we're worried about. So we all have anxiety that's part of the backdrop of who we are. And also people that we minister to and with, and who minister back to us. So it's amazing that I hear from pastors when I speak to them, when I ask them about doing the phone ministry, they say, "Oh, you wouldn't believe the number of people that have called me. How are you doing? Because I'm also of that age group that needs to be worried, or my health has not been good." So it's a mutual sharing of that. But I think, Father Frank, your point about it's sort of how do we deal with the anxiety? Of course, prayer helps. This time I hear lots of people saying, and it's true, it's a time for us how do we build on the solitude? Can we use the solitude to build our own prayer life, our connection with the Lord? So that is a big foundation of this. If each of us can do that, and then we ask God to help us with the anxiety. How do we make sure that we're not one more frantic voice among a lot of other voices? So that means we have to pay attention. We have to be educated. We have to listen to the resources that are trusted resources. This is a great opportunity. What the work that I do with schools and the church right now, we're talking about the faith and science conversation. of people leave the church, especially young people, because they see faith as fairy tale and they would rather listen to science. Well, here's one place in our life where science and the church should be working in tandem together for both the spiritual and the health of our people. So we're not seen as adversaries. In fact, we're kind of conversation partners. So how do we listen to the proper resources? The World Health Organization, to all these organizations that then say to us, okay, we're not here to scare you, we're not here to frighten you, but how do we help you prepare your people and to be a voice that says, you know what, wash your hands. Or if you're coming to visit the church, which our churches are open in a lot of places for prayer, make sure that you wash your hands with the sanitary soap as you come in and as you leave, help people to do the right things for the right reason and knowing that there's a spiritual connection to what we do. So it's, again, we don't get wound up by the craziness of sometimes of the culture. We kind of lean back, we ask God to direct us, we listen to the right voices to help us, to guide us. Of course, Jesus is the best voice, huh? And so he then tells us we then have to do something with the prayer. We have to put it to action.
Father Dave, are there any final thoughts that you think would be important to raise before we conclude our time together?
Right. I want to raise a word that sometimes brings some angst to it, and the word is money.
Yes.
I was listening to your great webinar yesterday with church management at Villanova and talking about how finances is going to be a piece of this, and it is for all of us. We need to know that as we look to hoping that our parishioners will find their support for the mission of the church. And that often comes through online donating or through envelopes and all that. But I really think our pastoral care, which is done first and not for the money, but because we want to connect people to the Lord, we hope that the money will follow the mission. So I really feel that if we live the mission and how we reach out to people and we care for people, I think people will see that and want to support the mission. So I know it's weighing on a lot of people's hearts and minds that are running organizations in the church, running dioceses, running parishes. And, we know that some of our people are losing their jobs. Some are, the millions of people that are looking for government assistance now. We hope that that's short term for a lot of them. They can go back to work. But I just feel that if we reach out to people pastorally, people will appreciate that. And then I think money follows mission. And if we live the mission of the church, which is the gospel, and we do it through the sacraments when we can do that, and how we can do that, and reaching out to people through great centers like yourselves, at the Catholic Apostolate and so many others, I think the finances will come because people will appreciate that and they'll want to buy on to the mission. Those are my closing comments, and I know the Lord is blessing us even as we care for people who are suffering and hurting.
Well, thank you, Father Dave, and please know that our prayers are with you and all in the Archdiocese of New Orleans. And we thank you for taking the time to be with us today and to offer these wonderful thoughts that are and tips and practices that are extremely important at this time. And these PDFs of these resources are available in our COVID-19 resources. You just go to CatholicApostolatecenter.org/COVID-19. Thank you for joining us, and may the charity of Christ urge us on.
Amen.